I wanted to start first by talking about our experience and the work we do in the context within which we all operate. Carolyn Lukensmeyer at lunch talked a bit about how the lack of civil discourse has become the norm within which we operate. At Dialogue Partners, it is the norm for the work we do. We work in spaces of conflict and high emotion and controversy, and I would say all of our projects are like that. And I believe that all the easy issues in the world have been solved. If you want to put a stop sign in and have a conversation with somebody about that, feel free. But we're talking about issues like poverty and climate change and nuclear waste and energy supply, things that require hard conversations and for which there are enormous passions. IAP2 has been around for a very long time, over 20 years. And I think at the beginning it did a really good job of laying the groundwork for the core values, for principles and measures of what does good engagement look like, for setting the standard of 3 foundations. If you're focused on decisions, if you've got purpose with your project, if you're talking to people about the issues that matter to them, then you're running a good engagement process. You're doing meaningful work. But I think times have changed. And I'm a trainer for IAP2 and have a long history with the organization, but I believe that in supporting practitioners and supporting conversations, IAP2 itself has not changed with the times and has not met the challenge of the lack of civil discourse that is present. You can no longer take the training in the certificate program and be prepared to deal with a conversation on climate change, or in nuclear waste, or in school closures, or anything else that polarizes people and pits them against each other. That IAP2 has not served us as practitioners, but nor have we stepped up to the challenge of defining what really meaningful engagement is in this new context. And so that's a bit what my talk is about. And I'll come back to IAP2 in a second. In our work, in our experience, we frequently hear from organizations and from clients that the best way to approach, polarized views or conflict is to just be clear about expectations. And by that they mean we'll be clear about our expectations and hopefully people will accept them and meet them. That doesn't usually work in my experience. If you tell people how you would like them to behave, what their role should be because you've decided that that's your expectation for them, they generally do the opposite in my experience. And that relates to the IAP2 spectrum of engagement. This idea that if people are passionate and they really, really care, but you can only make a commitment to a low level of influence or involvement, so then you should pick consult. I believe that actually contributes to polarization and conflict rather than decreasing it or changing the conversation or creating durable solutions in the end. I also hear regularly from other practitioners and from clients that the thing we should do is give people something to react to. So let's create options for them to comment on. Or let's say we've taken all the technical information and all of our scientists together and our technical experts and our engineers, and we've come up with what we think is the solution. So just tell us how that works for you, as if they should become technical experts rather than adding their life value and experience to it. Proposing options, proposing solutions actually polarizes people. It makes them feel inadequate. It means they don't know how to participate. It makes them feel like they should be engineers or scientists, and somehow that's what you're asking for from them. It makes them feel diminished in the conversation, and therefore it limits their participation or they disengage in the first place. I think in this new context, we have done the opposite of what we should do. We have focused on control and limiting people's influence or being clear about expectations or identifying a level of a spectrum and bringing it to the workshop and putting it on the table and saying to people, this is where we're at. Do you see your role here? When perhaps their expectations are actually to make the decision themselves. Or they're going to just coalesce and find their own group and run their own parallel consultation, and then you're surprised when you get to the end of the process and suddenly they've got a different solution than you have and they didn't go on the journey with you. I think this is a moment in time where there is the potential for us as practitioners to step up and do something different to meet the changes that we are experiencing in the context of engagement, and to actually meet those challenges of the lack of civil discourse and the polarization that exists. I think what we've created in the public engagement sphere is very fragile. This, just anybody, there's a couple Canadians in the room, this is an inukshuk. So in Canada, those are posted in the north. They're built, because there's not a lot of trees. They're signposts that you are on the right path. You are heading in the right direction. So they're like mile markers or, directional signs. I would say that we aren't in the right direction right now, but the gift we're being presented with is we couldn't possibly really do much worse. In, in an atmosphere of polarization and conflict and a lack of civil discourse. So the opportunity that is presented is that we look to the signpost and see the signs and the way people are gathering and opposing and Occupy and Keystone and Gateway and all of those things, and we say, this is a potential and an opportunity for change. Perhaps we might do something different. So our team, where we sit in that space, said, the sitting in the fire, we have spent some time thinking about what does good engagement look like? And what is it that's beyond what we're doing right now or that we say we will measure? And so we've come up with 4 factors we believe must be incorporated to any good or meaningful engagement process. The first we are calling risk, but we're not talking about risk like technical risk or scientific or engineering risk. We're talking about emotional risk. The perceptions and emotions in any given situation. You must understand and, I would say, embrace them. Not limit or manage or control them, but in any given situation where you have conflict, you must understand and embrace them. Change. You must understand the impacts over time, so the journey of a process. Now, I would say IAP2 has done a good job building capacity for people to plan for that over time. How do you engage people in a conversation that results in a decision? They've done a good job and an okay job in talking about emotion and how do you deal with people's values and what you do. What we haven't done as practitioners, and IAP2 is not solely responsible for this, what we haven't done as practitioners is actually teach people the attitudes and behaviors that build trust and build relationships, that result in commitment and courage, that build caring communities, that really create a different kind of discourse, that help organizations be part of the communities that they live in. This is just a diagram of the model we've created. So I want to tell you a story where those factors are really, really present. So where trust was a huge part of the conversation. Where leadership, and I want to call it with a small L, leadership, because we are each leaders. As practitioners, we are leaders to advocate for good and meaningful process. Community members are leaders who have courage to say things that need to be said. And in organizations, there are leaders who advocate for a good conversation. And of course, the emotion that's present in any kind of controversial conversation. I want you to visit a community in northern Canada called Sandy Bay. It's in the far north, in a province of Saskatchewan, so sort of kind of west middle of the country, up north. It's an incredibly remote location. There are 1,200 people who live in this community. 99.999% of them are Indigenous. They are Aboriginal, you would call them American Indian. They probably have a 70% unemployment rate. They have an incredibly low literacy rate. And all of the social problems that come with the impacts of colonialism and high unemployment and poverty. This community also was created to build a dam and a hydro generating station 90 years ago. And this organization called Sask Power hired us to transform the conflict, 80 years of conflict they had with this community. So we could have gone in with a good plan and cool techniques and the right questions and had lots of conversations with people, but we decided that we needed to step back, and the first thing you need to do is focus on trust and relationships, because you're never going to get a durable outcome unless you do those things. So the project started with the CEO and president delivering that message that what we've done in the past has not worked for us and we need to do it better. And it hasn't worked for you either. And we need to get it right this time because actually it's important. We are neighbors in this community. And we have a role and you have a role, but we've got to do something different. We talked to hundreds of people in the community. We had the gift of hearing their stories of the past and the present and the future. We met with elders and youth. We built capacity in the community to have conversations they had actually never had before, not even talked to each other about the conflict and the tragedy and the pain they had experienced. We heard about their hopes for the future and what things might look like. We also heard a grudging acceptance that this conversation could happen, but with limits and boundaries, that they would trust the conversation if change happened, if the commitment was kept and it was real. And leadership emerged in the community to voice concerns that had never been said before. Our conversations resulted in recommendations, of course, that dealt with tangible things like community investment, community programs, and long-term growth. But actually, I would say more importantly, it resulted in recommendations about the relationship, about the commitment and the courage, about how together two neighbors have a reciprocal responsibility to work together in seeing those things happen, in making the momentum for positive change happen. I believe really strongly that if you are going to do this work, if you are a practitioner in this space, you have a responsibility to build capacity in communities and in organizations to be caring and compassionate, to demonstrate attitudes and behaviors that build trust and relationships. I don't care how beautiful your process is and how good your tools are and what kind of techniques you have. If you haven't done those things, you will not resolve conflict or have meaningful engagement. You will not have durable outcomes or solutions that people buy into and they support long term. And that takes me back to IAP2. I think what we have as an organization taught people has limited and actually contributed to the polarization that is present. That as practitioners, we have a responsibility to advocate for civil discourse, to be leaders and have the courage to act, to call to each other and say, this is the space we hold. And that we won't pick the consult level, we'll remove those last two pieces of the spectrum, that we will hold the space for meaningful and hard conversations, and we will create the space for everyone to be part of it. And it doesn't matter if you are for or against, our job is the bridge in the middle. Thank you.